Hey, folks. I love that one of you, Rebecca Spence, I think your name is, has referred to this as the Hellscape Tour Bus, which I think really kind of sums up where we are this week, doesn't it? I absolutely love that. So welcome here from Lincoln, Nebraska. I saw 93 billion, and I don't know to what that is referring. I'm sure I should, so sorry about that. Biddeford, Maine, Stewart, Florida, Lafayette, Colorado, New Canton, Virginia, Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Oh, my friends at Valley Forge. Northern Ontario, you guys. Oh, Holland, Michigan. I had the nicest day in Holland, Michigan with my daughter a couple of years ago now. I still have a rock from it, actually. Anyway, I'm here, and I'm going to answer some specific questions, and then I'm going to try and give you some big picture stuff. So I hope I get to your questions, all of them, but they're a little bit all over the map, which makes sense in a lot of ways because we are in a period in which, I've said this to you a lot before, but it's very difficult to tell what the administration is doing, in part because they're trying so hard to make sure we don't know what they're doing. And as a result, you're unsettled all the time trying to figure out where the ground really is under your feet. And boy, is that happening in spades right now with this war in Iran. So let me actually start first with a question that somebody asked. It's really easy to explain. Somebody asked, what does this mean that there's people talking about how even if Trump doesn't sign a bill, it'll become a law? And that's an easy question. That's an easy one to answer. So if you look at the Constitution, I actually pulled it for you. I actually love history questions. If you look at the Constitution, the Congress, the two chambers of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate, are the only lawmaking body in the country. They're the ones who make the laws. That's why it's such a big deal when Trump refuses to fund something that Congress has both put into a law and then raised money for, because he's not supposed to do that. It's in Congress, and the House of Representatives is the only chamber that can originate a revenue measure. That's the framers were so concerned about taxes that they didn't want the Senate to be able to start those. The Senate has to vote on them, but revenue measures must start in the House. And someday, if we really have time, I can tell you about some of the cute ways that Congress has gotten around that. But any of the revenue bills that pass have to come from the House of Representatives. But so the way this works, as you know, is that a bill has to pass either the House or the Senate first, and then has to pass the other chamber. And usually, at least in the past, we've gotten these stupid giant omnibus bills lately, but in the past, usually they would disagree about something, the House and the Senate. So then it would go to a conference committee that would write a new measure that would weave out the disagreements. And then that compromise measure would be the one that actually ended up becoming the final measure. And that would have to be repassed. You say you don't mind my rabbit holes, so I'm going to go down in a rabbit hole here. I can think of two occasions in United States history when the final measure that passes the House and the Senate was changed between the time that it was written and the time it actually got published. And there's huge fights in both cases about whether or not that was deliberate or whether that was an error, because something got included that wasn't supposed to be. And then there's a real question of what is the actual law. But that's incredibly rare. Usually it's that final bill that becomes a law that passes the both chambers of Congress. And then it has to go to the president for a signature. And if the president signs it, it becomes a law. Alternatively, the president can veto it, can say, not happening, we're not doing this. And in that case, the House and the Senate can override the president's veto by 2/3 of Congress to say, well, yeah, actually, we are going to do this. And it's actually, I was going to say it's uncommon, but it's not all that uncommon, actually. And then, the question you asked was about the idea that something could become a law without the president's signature. And yes, here you go. But in all such cases, if any bill shall not be returned by the president within 10 days, Sundays excepted, after it shall have been presented to him, the same shall be a law in like manner as if he had signed it, unless Congress by their adjournment prevent its return, in which case it shall not be a law. Okay, so what's going on with that is that if the president doesn't sign it and the House and the Senate are in session, the Congress is in session, then in 10 days, it automatically becomes a law. But if Congress has adjourned, that is not in session, not simply home for the weekend, but not in session, then the president can refuse to sign it and it does not become a law. And that's what we know of as a pocket veto. So yes, Trump threatened the other day that, and I'll talk more about this, if he didn't get his way on some dramatic changes he wants to make to our voting system, then he would simply refuse to sign any laws. And that was supposed to be some great threat. What I think you're really seeing with that is Trump's terror that he is losing control of the world around him, and his threats are getting more and more and more extreme as that happens. I will point out that the Congress isn't doing very much anyway, so it's not like, this is a whole huge thing that's going to be a problem. Obviously, it would be a problem if the president simply said, I'm not going to play ball anymore. But in fact, if he decided to walk away, within 10 business days, not including Sundays, anything that the House and the Senate pass would become a law, unless it's after the end of the Congress, at which point he could pocket veto it. All right, I hope that was easy. It was clear. I hope that was clear. Actually, that was an easy one. But so what's going on? The big picture here is that the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is losing control of himself and of the country. And with those things, he is doing an enormous amount of damage. So I'm not going to rehearse here the things he has done since he has been in his term, but the loss of the tariffs in front of the Supreme Court was a huge blow to him, not just because it embodied his version of the economy, but also because he was using the pressure of those tariffs to get other countries to give things to him and to give in to him. So taking those away and saying not only you can't have them, but also that you were wrong and you need to pay them back has been really debilitating for him. So, his administration has tried desperately to say, we can't pay these people back. We don't know how to pay these people back. We don't have the systems to pay these people back. And the judges have said, that is your problem. You did this, fix it. Trump is not accustomed to be in this is your problem, you did it, fix it kind of a position. So one of the things that the Supreme Court did when it decided Donald J. Trump v. U.S. in July of 2024 was that it suggested that so long as Trump was operating within his Article 2 powers, that is the section of the Constitution that lays out what the president is supposed to do, then he couldn't be prosecuted for committing crimes. And that there was this presumption that the things that the president was supposed to do, even if it was not Article 2 powers, but sort of presidential powers, that there was a presumption that he had immunity in those cases as well. Now, one of the things it's done since is it's emphasized that it considers foreign affairs part of the areas in which he has untrammeled authority. And I say that they say that because that's actually a really big debate in both in history and in law as who really has control over foreign affairs, because of course the Congress has the power to levy war, and the Senate has the power to approve of treaties. So it's not entirely clear that the president is supposed to be able to do whatever he wants. That's really a post-World War II phenomenon, I think, especially after the construction of the National Security Agency, which kind of centers power in the president. But the Supreme Court has said that generally the courts are supposed to give him a lot of leeway in foreign affairs. And so he has tried to justify a lot of what he has done based in foreign affairs, but he has really started to use the power of the president as commander-in-chief. You hear him talk about that a lot, and his supporters talk about that a lot, to do whatever he wants with regard to foreign affairs. And what he is trying to do there is, one, to suggest that the United States is dominant over other countries because of our extraordinary military, but also to reorder the global order, which I've talked about here a lot. After World War II, the allies from that war put together a system that was designed to stop future world wars. And it's designed to stop those world wars by creating a sort of shared economic system, shared trade. And by the way, you've heard me talk a lot about freedom of the seas. Freedom of the seas is obviously very much at stake right now. And you can see all these countries suddenly panicking and real concerns about the global economy because of the idea that people will not continue to have freedom of the seas, that countries will be able to stop the ships outside or that are within their, that they can attack ships on the seas. But there's this idea that they would be able to create this web around the world through global trade through global alliances like the World Health Organization and the United Nations and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and AUKUS and all the different ways in which we are connected. And also, by the way, universities and the sharing that we have, like the what's it called, the scholarship, the really high-powered scholarship, like the Marshall Fellowship or the Rhodes Scholarship or Rotary Club Fellowships, all those things where scholars went from one country to another, exchanged students. Those are designed to create a smaller world so that we have friends in other countries and that we are designed that we're not going to go to war with our friends. And the other pillar of that, of course, was the idea of spreading liberal democracy, the idea that people should have a right to have a say in their government, and that those things would create a world that would prevent a world war. Now, Trump has worked to tear down all three of those pillars since he took office. And the trade one because of the tariffs, and that he has been really threatening Europe, that the U.S. would not stand with Europe, and is really been going after a lot of our old alliances, and instead continually emphasizing a world that looks very much like the one that Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, wants, which is the idea of sort of a very few strong states. In his mind, Russia, which is not a strong state, but is becoming so, he sort of tries to portray that with the idea that he can grab a whole bunch of other territory, including in Ukraine and further on now. One with Europe, with Europe having to defer to Russia, one with the United States running the Western Hemisphere, and probably one around Xi Jinping in China. And the idea there is if you have a really strong state at the center of these areas, all the other states kind of have to suck up to it because otherwise they're going to get squished, right? So what you can see with Trump's attacks on Venezuela and the taking out of the president there, Nicolás Maduro, and his wife Celia Flores, but leaving in place the regime under who was then the vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, you can see this idea of sort of having a kind of, I won't call it a puppet state because we're not there yet, but at least I don't think, I'm not paying that close attention to internal Venezuelan politics, but the idea that the president of the United States has essentially said that this is a leader who's willing to work with him. And of course, Trump has taken over the oil of Venezuela. But you saw it also in the interference of the U.S. in the Honduran election when the president pardoned the former president of Honduras right before an election so his party would get reelected. The attempt to prop up Javier Milei in Argentina, the attempt to protect Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, the ways in which the United States is messing around in Latin America. And you're seeing it now increasingly with these attacks on these small boats probably out of Venezuela. I'm going to hedge my bets there because all we have is what the administration is saying they are. They've offered no proof ever. But also with this idea of the shield of the Americas that Trump is now talking about. And he had a meeting in Florida about earlier this week or late last week, or I guess it was over the weekend. I've totally lost track of what day it is. And the idea behind that, and there's also been an attempt on the part of the administration to put together a group of countries in Latin America that are going to be it's an anti-cartel council, I think they're calling it. And what they've said what the administration said to these countries is, you take care of the drug cartels in your countries or we will. And, they're trying to show this as like, we're going to cooperate with you. But no, basically the United States is saying, we're going to come bomb your countries if you don't do what we say. And that idea of Trump doing this and creating this world around the United States in the Western Hemisphere also is part of why he's talking about taking Greenland and taking over Canada, which he's back on today again, because it's this attempt of him to say, I'm sort of going to be king of this universe. And I always thought that the whole idea of his Board of Peace, which was designed to replace the United Nations, but put him at the center of everything. If he at the head of the Board of Peace is the one who gets to stay and do everything, he gets he gets final word on everything, he gets control of the money and so on, was an attempt to sort of say, I'm going to be sort of the king of the universe over here. But part of that idea that he's going to be he's going to run the Western Hemisphere is that when he has done things like attacked those small boats, and especially the double tap strike of September 2nd, but even the attacks themselves pretty clearly are extra legal, that is illegal, and the Congress didn't say anything about it. And so then he goes in and he takes the Venezuelan president. He launches an attack on Venezuela without telling Congress and extracts the president and his wife. It's just an astonishing thing. And again, the Congress said nothing. So it appears that he decided to do the same thing in Iran. That he was simply going to go in there, have a really fast strike, get rid of the leader of Iran, a man in his 80s, and put somebody else in place that he wanted to deal with, which is, by the way, looks quite a bit like what Vladimir Putin tried to do in Ukraine. You remember the whole idea of going after the leaders of Ukraine was to replace Volodymyr Zelensky with Putin's sort of hand-picked oligarch in its place. And I don't have time to go into that now, but if you're interested, look up what's called the Mariupol Plan. I think there's stuff about it, perhaps even in Wikipedia, but it's easy enough to follow. Anyway, he planned to just go do this. He was just going to go take the Iran and grab the leaders, kill the leaders, and then put somebody, maybe the Iranian people would rise up and they put somebody else in that place, and then he would be able to do what he wanted in Iran. Well, that didn't go as planned, and anybody who knew anything about foreign affairs knew that wasn't going to go according to plan, because of the simple fact, aside from anything else, that Iran controls the Strait of Hormuz. Look it up on a map. And the problem with that is that 20% of the world's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And what Trump did was, first of all, touched off a war in the Middle East. And that, again, was pretty obviously what was going to happen. After the June attacks on Iran, remember, he attacked Iran in June, the war went on for about 12 days. But on the heels of that, and mind you, I know this stuff, and this is all open source material. This is not, some secret anywhere. You just had to read the damn newspapers. Iran decided that to protect itself, it was going to make the next American strike or Israeli strike as painful as it was humanly possible for them to do. And so that's exactly what happened. After Israel struck leaders in Iran, and the U.S. struck infrastructure and military infrastructure, Iran hit back around the region onto U.S. bases in the region, because, of course, the U.S. has a ton of bases over there. And in the process, of course, then it's got a lot of people firing back and forth at each other. And then inevitably people get hurt. The wrong sorts of people get hurt. That is, you don't manage to hit just what you're aiming for. And pretty dramatically in that first strike, it certainly appears, and everybody, except Trump says this is true, the U.S. hit a girls' school. Now, in international law, if you deliberately hit a civilian facility, that's a war crime. And in this case, it appears that the U.S. they probably thought it was something it wasn't. But it sure looks like we hit that girls' school. And like more than 160 people are dead, and most of them are little girls. And that's, I don't have adjectives for that. So part of what we're seeing now is Trump sort of thought this was just going to be in and out, one and done. And instead what they got was they kicked over a hornet's nest. But people keep saying, like, what's the end game here? There wasn't an end game. There isn't an end game because we're not supposed to be there. They really thought we'd go in and get out. But there's no way you're going to do an in and out in Iran. So now we are looking at a president and an administration that is trying desperately to backfill and to say, well, there's a reason we went in. So one of the things you're going to hear, that you're already hearing a lot, is that the Iranians, somebody today said, well, the Iranians were going to have 20 to 40 nuclear missiles this week if Trump didn't go in. And that's just ridiculous. It's just utterly ridiculous. I mean, not least, he said last June that he had destroyed their nuclear capabilities, which was obviously a stretch. But the people who examine that world say, the Iranians were at least a decade away, not only from the development of a nuclear weapon, but also from the conventional weapons to deliver that. Because once you got a bomb, that doesn't do it. You got to deliver it to another rabbit hole. That's actually one of the really interesting things about the the development in the United States about a nuclear weapon during World War II is the scientists knew how to make the weapon. The question was, how do you deliver it? That was actually the bigger issue, is how do you create it in such a way that you can actually make the reaction happen when you want it to. So the delivery of these things is key, obviously, and the same is true of North Korea. They're trying to figure out ways to deliver the weapons, which is itself a very deep scientific problem, right? So that idea that somehow Trump has saved us from nuclear war on our doorstep with Iran is just completely made up. And so we've had, we were protecting the people there, they were going to rise up. And now we've got Trump saying, well, actually, we're going to flatten them. And you've got all these ways in which he's trying to backfill and say, this is why I did it, when in fact there really wasn't a plan to do it. And there isn't an end game. So normally if one declares a war, like George H.W. Bush did against, or it wasn't, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said declared a war, because he didn't. It was a military action. But he did have the permission of Congress, by the way. But his goal was to push Iraq back over the Kuwaiti border. And once they had done that, that was it. They were done. That was the plan. Just get them, because you could say, we did it. This is what we set out to do, and we did it. We have no goal here. The president has just said, we're going to destroy them. We're going to get rid of their capabilities. We're going to, till they make us happy. I mean, he has no idea what the end game is. So what does that mean? What does that do for where we are? First of all, there was a meeting today in the Senate of the Senate Armed Services Committee. They got a classified briefing from members of the administration. And, they came out of that meeting furious, just furious. And you can see on YouTube, I think it is, Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut just saying, we have no idea why we're there. They don't have any idea why we're there. And they're talking about putting our sons and daughters, our soldiers, on the ground in Iran.